So again, a lot has happened in the last 50 years, including recognizing the 16 sites that are on the National Register in the city. What we call Attleboro today is, of course, the ancestral homeland of the Pokanoket and Wampanoag, as well as other earlier people who were the original stewards of this land. The colonial town of Attleboro was founded in 1694 and then later became a city in 1914. And throughout its history, various people have been putting their stamp on this land. Throughout its, I already said that part. These are just a few of the important pieces of Attleboro's history that have been listed in the National Register of Historic Places. So just a little bit about the National Register real quick, in case that's something you're not familiar with. So in 1966, the US government created the National Register of Historic Places, which is maintained by the National Park Service. It's an official list of sites deemed worthy of preservation due to their historical, architectural, archaeological, or other cultural significance to this country. Although it's administered by the National Park Service, nominations are actually reviewed and recommended at the state level through the State Historic Preservation Office, and the acronym that you'll hear is SHPO. Today, the process can be lengthy, 1 year, sometimes longer, and often requires a specialist to write that nomination, although that was not the case in early years. It can take several submissions for the state to review them if they ask for revisions. In the late 1970s, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts created its own record of state and local resources called the Massachusetts Cultural Resource Information System, affectionately referred to as MACRIS. And this is available to the public and is accessible online through the Massachusetts Historical Commission. So if you just kind of Google MACRIS, you can find it. And then the state register forms are, if there is National Register, they're also linked on there. So it's kind of a one site for both of them, the state and federal listing. So people always want to know what are the advantages and disadvantages of being listed in the National Register. And for the most part, there aren't any. The value is purely intrinsic, but there can be financial benefits. For the most part, people do it for that recognition, that prestigious designation that they're a National Historic Site. Historic homes can be highly desirable, so living in a historic home or neighborhood can often raise property values. You see that in places like Benefit Street in Providence, Beacon Hill in Boston, where those houses are much more expensive. There can be potential for funding, but listing, usually it's for federal and state grants or tax incentives, and not really for individual homeowners. More consideration in federal and state projects, so federal and state agencies are required to consider any potential impact on listed properties, whether that's state or national, and this can potentially help them avoid impacts on historic properties. Listing does not guarantee protection. It does not prevent private homeowners from making changes or demolishing their properties. But what it would do is just trigger that additional review if a state or federal funding was used on a project near your home. So the people that are worried about, if I list my house, I'm not going to be able to make any changes, really listing in the National Register has, it's like a homeowners association. If you're individually listed, there is no requirements. If you are part of one of the historic districts that is state recognized, it's like an HOA, it's like a homeowners association. So there can be a little bit of that, paint color, use the correct doors, but for the average listing, it doesn't really impact a property. So Attleboro has 16 listings, but many, many more properties than that, because the listing often involves other buildings and structures around you. There are 766 individual home sites and districts that are listed in MACRIS, that state site. And all of these have come about in the last 50 years. So our first listing was in 1978, and it's at 42 North Avenue. It's the Capron House. So this colonial farmhouse was built by Revolutionary War veteran Captain Joseph Capron around 1740 and lived in by his descendants for over 200 years. Captain Capron was one of the many children of Banfield Capron, the first of Attleboro's Capron. And thanks to the Capron descendants, of which there are many, their name, such as the park, has become synonymous with Attleboro. Local historian Marian Wrightington is the homeowner, and she wrote the National Register nomination, and she's lived in the house with her family since 1969. If you were here for some of the earlier presentations, you heard lore of this house and its owner, but we'll mention this is the Captain Joel Robinson House. This is at 111 Rock Lawn Ave. So it's close to Old Town. It's just where Attleboro and North Attleboro meet. If you're trying to place it, it's a little bit off the beaten path. So Captain Joel Robinson built this house around 1790 for his bride, Margaret Blackington. Captain Robinson served in the American Revolution and was the captain of the regular Attleboro militia after the war. The road was originally called Meeting House Road, but was changed to Rock Lawn Ave by Charles Phillips about 1890. The name Rock Lawn was taken from the large red rock glacier boulder in the yard. It is said that many of the town problems were settled here in the old barn or barnyard. The nomination for this property was written in 1978 by Betty Phillips, who Carlton spoke of, who was one of the founders of the Industrial Museum. And her husband was a descendant of Captain Robinson, and 9 generations of family descendants had lived in the property before it was sold out of the family. This is the Blackington Houses and Park. This is right on North Main Street. So this site includes 2 houses which were constructed in 1849 by Colonel Willard Blackington for his family. Colonel Blackington's homestead is actually 200 North Main, the one on the left-hand side. It's a large Greek Revival home with subsequent rear additions and a 20th century factory. The double house across the street, so on the right-hand side, or it was a double house when it was built, was actually built for Colonel Blackington's 2 of his sons. So in 1827, Colonel Blackington had established the area as a shuttle shop where he utilized the water power from the Bungay River and Blackington Pond to manufacture wooden shuttles, which were used in the cotton looms so integral to the textile mills in this area. Today, there's a replica of the shuttle shop at the rear of the main house and factory. The Blackingtons sold the homestead to the Nerney family in 1882, where 3 generations of that family lived and worked in the family business, the Nobby Crafter. And there's a few of their pin displays in the Industrial Museum. The National Register nomination was written by Ruth Nerney in 1979. Gary Demers purchased the property in 2019, making him only the 3rd family to own this property since 1849. The first parsonage for the Second Parish Church, this was at 41 South Main Street. This was a federal-style home, which was the original parsonage for East Parish, also known as the Second Congregational Church. And it was built in 1822 for the church's 3rd minister, the Reverend John Ferguson. Reverend Ferguson lived here with his wife and 11 children. Moses Wilmarth, who Mr. Foster referenced, was the next owner, and eventually it was the home of Joseph W. Capron. About 1945, it was used as an apartment building and was sold and resold many times. In 1980, it was listed in the National Register. If you can't quite place where this building is, that's because it was purchased by the Attleboro Sun and turned into a parking lot after the house was demolished in 1998. As you can see, National Register status does not necessarily save a building. So this is the lot that recently gained attention for the developers seeking some tax breaks on the proposed apartment building. It's on South Main, right between Christopher Heights and the new apartment building. So it's that parking lot across from the Sun Chronicle. Fortunately, it's the only one of our National Register properties that we've lost. The Herbert A. Sadler House or Mansion. This is at 57 Newport Avenue. This colonial revival mansion was built about 1906 for Herbert Sadler, the senior partner of Sadler Brothers Mill in South Attleboro. The building was listed in 1982 for its significance at the local level for both the quality of its architecture and a monument to the prosperity of the South Attleboro jewelry industry at the turn of the 20th century. Recently, the exterior integrity of the building has been compromised after there were several accidents. I believe a truck hit the portico. And the southwest portico has been removed and all of the columns, or some of the columns. So again, this is another example where that National Register status alone doesn't necessarily protect a property from being changed. Hebronville Mill Historic District. So it's kind of at the confluence of Knight Ave, Phillip Street, Reed Street. It was built in 1854, and the Hebron Mill factory dominates the district. The second Empire mansard roof, so that's that kind of sloping of that top floor, are visible throughout the surrounding community. Typical and necessary of so many of the early mills, the factory is adjacent to the 10-mile river and the railroad. Surrounding the mill are many support buildings and factory housing. The district originally had 38 contributing properties, many of those the mill houses, although several of those have been lost over the years. The district was listed in 1984 as part of a rehabilitation project by a private organization to capitalize on those tax incentives. So that is one of the advantages to being listed, is it does make you eligible often as a business for tax credits. These are the advantages to being listed, which can be profitable, but then the renovations must be done in compliance with the Secretary of Interior's standards for rehabilitation, which try and maintain that historical integrity, especially to the exterior of the property and its uses. That's the old footbridge that used to go over the railroad tracks. That has been lost over the years, but the main mill itself has been recently re-renovated. This is a representation, we'll call it, of Knoll C, which is our only archaeological site in Attleboro that's on the list. So Knoll C is not the only archaeological site in the city. It's just the only one that was been significant enough to be listed in the register. So the location of archaeological sites are guarded, so they're kept secret to avoid potential theft or pot hunters, as those thieves are called, from removing artifacts from the sites. So I can't tell you where it is, but what I can tell you is it's a Middle Archaic site, which means that it's from about 8,000 to 6,000 years old, and the stone tools from this area are often utilizing the red feltsite and quartz that are found naturally around here. So at the front of the museum, there's a small case at the Industrial Museum, which includes many such artifacts. So that little picture on the left is actually from that case. And they were once displayed at the Bronson Museum, which was on the top floor of the Bronson building here in downtown. The illustration on the right is from Dr. Maurice Robinson's booklet, The Indian History of Attleboro, and it's an example of what an archaic village might look like at the time. The site was discovered in 1984, although Dr. Robbins had been collecting along that area for much, much longer than that. And it was placed on the state and national register for its significance. If you're wondering about the Bronson Museum, in 1988, the Bronson Museum packed up and moved to Middleborough, and it was renamed in honor of Dr. Robbins. So it's the it's the Robbins Museum in Middleborough, and it's the headquarters for the Massachusetts Archaeological Society. And of course, near and dear to our hearts at the Historical Society is the East Attleboro Academy. It's at 28 Sanford Street, so just behind the YMCA. So this was built in 1842. It's a Greek Revival building, so the columns and that kind of triangular pediment are what make it a Greek Revival, kind of reminiscent of old Greek temples. It's 2 stories high, and it has a large open classroom, one on each floor, and it's the only surviving public building from this time period left in the East Village. Initially, it was constructed as a private school to provide the community with access to higher education. However, the private school did not last very long, and within those first 10 years, it was sold to the town to be used as its first public high school on the east side. So remember, we're all still one Attleboro at this point. After a dedicated high school was built on Bank Street, the academy over time housed elementary classes. It was just one of the 3 schools that were on what was called Schoolhouse Hill on Sanford Street. It was used for the school department, the historical commission, and most recently it was leased by the Attleboro Historic Preservation Society. Being listed in the National Register in 1985 was not enough to save this building from potential destruction. In fact, the Attleboro Historic Preservation Society was founded in 1999 with the primary goal of saving the academy from demolition. It was able to do that with a dedicated group of volunteers and members, and over the years, AHPS has maintained the building and completed small projects, but its vision was never fully realized because they did not own the building. That made funding difficult. In a bold move, the Attleboro Historic Preservation Society gave up their lease last year with the city, and the city put it up for sale. After 2 submissions, the AHPS bid was accepted by the city, and we are currently waiting to negotiate a purchase and sales of the property, and we're excited that after 26 years, we may soon be making significant progress on the building. And of course, yay! We will definitely use our National Register status to our advantage when we are applying for some of those grants. This is the DE Makepeace Company, so what direction am I? Just right over here at 46 Pine Street. This large 3-story U-shaped complex was built between 1894 and 1955 by David Makepeace. Makepeace first started out in Providence and relocated to Attleboro in 1888, first renting space from other manufacturers. The company specialized in precious metal plating of metal wire, sheeting, tubing, etc. that was used around the city of jewelry manufacturers and sold nationally as well. Although wooden clapboard factories were once commonplace in the city, the Makepeace factory is one of the few remaining examples. Listed in 1985, it had been vacant for many years before it was acquired by a private organization to rehabilitate into affordable housing and using tax credits. Today, it's owned by the company called Preservation of Affordable Housing. Their acronym is POA. And one of their specialties is renovating historic properties. So they also own Hebron Mill. So Hebron Mill and the Makepeace factory are owned by the same company, and they both recently went under re-renovations. The U.S. Post Office, the Attleboro main branch that was at Park Street, was completed in 1916, and it's located at the corner of those 2 streets, and it was the first purposeful-built post office in the city. Previously, spaces were rented or were out of homes or hotels. It's a neoclassical style building built out of Indiana limestone, which was a common building material for public institutions in the early part of the 20th century. Reminiscent of Roman temples, there are 10 Tuscan columns that span the portico on the north side of the building that faces Park Street. The exterior of the building is relatively unchanged, and several of the interior characteristics remain. Although the postal lock boxes have been removed, the marble floor and service windows with transoms are still intact in the lobby. So if you go in to use the Registry of Deeds, you can still see all of those. The post office was listed on the National Register in 1987 when a number of post offices throughout the state were being listed at the same time. In 1994, after the new post office was built on Pleasant Street, the old post office was purchased by the city of Attleboro. Today it holds a number of state and local offices, as well as a wall display in the lobby dedicated to the town crier and historian Larry Fitton. So if you haven't been in there to see that, just pop in the lobby to go visit the Larry Fitton display. So these are the northbound and southbound railway stations at 1 and 3 Mill Street. So they were the stations for the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad. I'm just going to call it the railroad from now on because that's too much to say, which was formerly part of the Boston and Providence Railroad. And they were both listed on the National Register in 1989. The northbound station was the first of the two constructed in 1906, and this was because they needed to construct new stations after the raising of the railroad to eliminate the street level grade crossings throughout the city. So it's nestled between Mill Street and South Main Street arches, and the building is accessible from both of those streets as well as the Union Street side. While the exterior of the one-story building is relatively intact, in 2009, renovations to the interior reworked the commuter waiting room, restrooms, and a cafe was added. The southbound station was completed a few years later in 1908, and unlike the northern side, it's built into the slope of the land between the tracks and South Main Street. It's a Richardsonian Romanesque style of brick and granite building blocks, which rises 2 stories off of Mill Street. The freight came in through the first story of the southbound station, and it was transported across the track if it needed to head north. And as many might remember, there was also a tunnel between the 2 stations which provided pedestrian access under the tracks, so you didn't have to go around to the street levels. However, that tunnel has now been blocked and is used for utilities in the building. In 1986, the building was privately restored and continues to house multiple buildings, most recently referred to as the Torre building. While most of the buildings and homes surrounding the northbound station have been there for over 100 years, if you can kind of picture this side of the street, on the southbound side of the station, most of those buildings have been built in the 21st century. So we've lost the barn and the factories and the parsonage all along South Main Street side of the southbound station. The 2 main structures have been rehabilitated, but the canopy on the southbound side is not part of the privately owned Torre building. It is instead in the jurisdiction of the MBTA and Amtrak. So over the last decade, despite ongoing warnings from the Attleboro Historical Commission to Amtrak and MBTA, the terracotta tiles are cracking, they're falling off, and the wooden structure is compromised. Neglect of this structure by these transportation authorities has really put that part of the building in jeopardy. Dodgeville Mill. So Dodgeville Mill is at 453 South Main Street. So the Dodgeville Mill's main mill was primarily constructed between 1809 and 1872, with many additional buildings and alterations, and some well into the 1960s. The sprawling 4-story mill is mainly constructed of timber framing and clad in wood, but also has several brick additions. There are 16 contributing resources, including the dam and spillway along the 10 Mile. It does not include the 23 mill houses in the neighborhood that surround the buildings and would have supported the owners and workers in their daily lives. So the schools, the stores, the church, and a lot of the mill housing. As with nearby Hebron Mill, Dodgeville Mill was originally a textile mill and occupies a strategic location along the 10 Mile River and then what would eventually come by the railroad. So the mill was there before the railroad in this case. Although it's no longer operated as a factory, Dodgeville Mill is a privately owned business. And in 2018, Gary Demers, the current owner, successfully had the property listed in the National Register. This is the Watson Newell Company factory at 67 Mechanic Street. So this factory sits on an 8.8-acre former industrial property that manufactured silver jewelry and flatware from 1894 to 1955. Its soaring smokestack along the west end of the complex is an iconic symbol of the industrial buildings throughout the city. And although we have lost quite a few smokestacks in the city, retaining this smokestack was actually a requirement by the State Historic Preservation Office in order to preserve its appearance and qualify for those tax credits. In 2019, it was converted into residential use as part of an adaptive reuse historic preservation project, and in 2020, it was listed in the National Register. Like most of the residential listings previously mentioned, historic tax credits were a big incentive for renovating the building. Constructed between 1894 and 1916, the parcel contains 8 contributing resources. 6 of them are conjoined into kind of various attachments and wings, and then 2 of them are detached buildings. The developer, Wynn Developers, was very cooperative during the renovations, allowing the Attleboro Historic Commission to tour and photo document the property and the process, and allowed AACS to video a tour of the interior during construction. Today, the property is called Sterling Lofts in honor of its historic origins in silver manufacturing. All right, you were sitting outside, you were staring at this building. This is the Robinson Building at 37 Union Street. So just across the street is the Robinson Building, although locally many still refer to it as the Foster Building. It's an industrial complex that consists of 2 4-story brick manufacturing buildings constructed in 1875 and 1880, and then later they were joined into a single building. The buildings are primarily constructed of red brick with stone trim, which would later prove to be of strategic importance. Primarily constructed by E.A. Robinson for his jewelry company, it was a multi-tenant jewelry factory renting space in the building to other jewelry firms. This was especially important after the Great Fire in 1898, when much of this section of downtown Attleboro was damaged or destroyed in fire. The Robinson Building is directly adjacent to where a fire occurred, but its fireproof construction of brick spared it from the flames, and then it provided space to some of those nearby businesses which had been destroyed so they could resume production. Listed in the National Register in 2023, today it's a residential property known as Union Mills 37, borrowing its name from its Union Street address. And I'm going to close with our newest National Register property. So this is the Attleboro Jewelry Industry Historic District, primarily between Union and Dunham Streets. This was just listed earlier this year, and it consists of 8 contributing properties, of which this building, the Attleboro Refining Company, is one of them. So although it's not individually listed, it is now on the register because it is within this district. The nomination started as for just 2 of the buildings, the Ingraham and Varnier buildings, which is pretty much the large picture there. Those are the 2 buildings. And they've been converted into an apartment complex known as the Jewel. Again, the developers were seeking those ever important tax credits, and when they submitted their nomination to the State Historic Office, it was rejected. And they asked them to rethink it in favor of a district so that they included more than just their properties in the listing. So as the name implies, it's a tight little cluster of buildings and additions that were associated with the jewelry industry, spanning a time frame from about 1857 to 1954. And again, although it sounds like there are only 8 buildings, there are many, many more businesses that were on the various floors and in parts of the buildings throughout them. So in planning our programs for next year, the first program that we're planning is actually a walking tour of this new historic district. So in September, the Historical Society, in conjunction with the Industrial Museum, is going to walk these kind of downtown blocks and kind of talk about the history of the businesses and factories that were down here. And thank you for coming.